I was reading a contract at my desk when my phone rang at 2:04 a.m. The screen showed an unknown number with a Virginia area code. I let it ring once more, then answered out of habit. Years of being on call for work had trained me to pick up, even at odd hours. There was silence, then breathing, then a voice, barely audible, worn down to something between a whisper and a rasp. Marcus. Just my name, nothing else. I sat up straighter, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something in the way it shaped my name, a particular emphasis on the first syllable, that pulled at a memory I couldn't quite place. "Who is this?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "It's me." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for several minutes, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. I tried calling back. The number didn't accept incoming calls. I searched it online and found nothing. No name, no location, just a generic listing for a Virginia exchange. I told myself it was a wrong number, a prank. Someone with too much time and a cruel sense of humor. But I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in my home office with the lights off, looking out at the empty street below, and tried to convince myself I hadn't recognized that voice. Because if I had, it would mean my father, who'd been dead for 27 years, had just called me. My father died in 1997 when I was 19, heart attack. He'd been 51, in decent health as far as any of us knew, and then one morning he didn't wake up. My mother found him. I was away at college. My younger sister Vanessa was still in high school. The funeral was small. He'd been a quiet man, kept to himself, worked as a civil engineer for the state. He had a few colleagues who came, some neighbors, a couple of guys from his veterans group. We buried him at Riverside Memorial, under a simple headstone with his name, rank, and dates of service. I'd visited his grave maybe a dozen times over the years, always alone. I'd stand there for a few minutes, not really knowing what to say, and then I'd leave. Vanessa went more often. She'd been closer to him than I was, or maybe she just needed it more. I hadn't thought about him much lately. Not in any deep way. He was just part of the background of my life now. A presence that had shaped me and then disappeared, leaving behind a handful of memories and a vague sense of unfinished business I'd never been able to name. But after that phone call, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I spent the next day distracted, going through the motions at work. I ran a small legal consultancy, contract review, compliance audits. Nothing glamorous, but it paid well and let me work from home most of the time. I had calls scheduled, emails to return, a client presentation to prep. I did all of it on autopilot, my mind elsewhere. That night I called Vanessa. "Did Dad ever talk to you about anything unusual?" I asked. "Before he died. Anything he was worried about, or working on, or—" "Where is this coming from?" she interrupted. I hesitated. I didn't want to tell her about the phone call. She'd think I was losing it. Or worse, she'd want to talk about it, dissect it, turn it into something bigger than it was. "Just thinking about him," I said. "It's been almost 30 years. 27, she corrected. "And no, he didn't talk to me about much. You know how he was." I did. Our father had been a man of routines and silences. He went to work, came home, ate dinner, read the paper, went to bed. On weekends he worked in the garage or watched football. He wasn't cold exactly, just distant, like he was always thinking about something else. "Why?" Vanessa asked. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said. "Just curious." She didn't push it. We talked for a few more minutes about her kids, her husband's new job, the weather. Then we hung up. I didn't sleep well that night either. I kept replaying the voice in my head, trying to match it to my father's. But it had been so long, and the voice on the phone had been so broken and thin. I wasn't sure anymore if I'd really heard what I thought I'd heard. 2 days later, the phone rang again. Same time, same number. This time I answered on the first ring. "Who is this?" I said immediately. The breathing was heavier now, labored. "Marcus, listen." "Who are you?" I demanded. "I don't have much time." They watch, they listen. I shouldn't. The line cut out, not a clean disconnect. It sounded like the phone had been taken away or dropped. I sat there with my hand shaking, staring at the screen. I called back again. Nothing. I tried a reverse lookup service. Still nothing. But this time I'd recorded it. I played it back 3 times, listening to every detail. The voice was male, older, struggling to speak. There was background noise, faint but present, a beeping sound. Distant voices, the kind of ambient noise you hear in hospitals or care facilities. And there was something else, a particular cadence to the way he said my name, a slight pause between the syllables. My father used to do that when he was trying to get my attention, when he wanted to make sure I was really listening. I opened my laptop and started searching. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I needed to do something. I pulled up my father's death certificate. I'd requested a copy years ago when settling some estate paperwork. I read through it carefully, looking for anything unusual. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Time of death, approximately 400 a.m., pronounced dead at scene. Body transported to county medical examiner. Autopsy not performed per family request. I frowned at that last part. I didn't remember anyone asking about an autopsy. My mother had made most of the arrangements, and she'd never mentioned it. But maybe she'd declined it and never told us. It would have been like her, trying to spare us additional pain. I called the county records office the next morning and requested a copy of the full medical examiner's report. They told me it would take a week to process. I spent that week digging. I went through old boxes in my storage unit looking for anything related to my father. I found tax returns, pay stubs, a few birthday cards he'd signed. I found a photo album from the late 80s and early 90s. My father in his work uniform. My father at Vanessa's middle school graduation. My father standing next to a car he'd rebuilt. In one photo, he was standing with two other men I didn't recognize. They were all in casual clothes, holding beers, smiling. My father looked relaxed in a way I rarely remembered him being. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, Memorial Day Cookout 1995, and 2 years before he died. I scanned the photo and ran a reverse image search. Nothing. I posted it in a couple of veteran forums, asking if anyone recognized the men. No responses. Then, on the 6th night, my phone rang again. I answered immediately. "I'm listening," I said. "The house," the voice whispered. "The basement. Look in the—" A crash, shouting in the background. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, heart pounding. Then I got in my car and drove to my mother's house. My mother still lived in the house I'd grown up in. She'd considered downsizing over the years but never followed through. She liked the space, she said. The familiarity. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the driveway. The lights were off. I used my key to let myself in, moving quietly so I wouldn't wake her. I went straight to the basement door and flipped on the light. The basement was half finished, part storage space and part workshop. My father's old tools were still there gathering dust. Boxes of holiday decorations. Broken furniture no one had bothered to throw out. I started searching. I didn't know what I was looking for. I moved boxes, checked behind shelves. Ran my hands along the walls looking for loose panels or hidden compartments. It took me almost an hour, but I found it. Behind a stack of paint cans, there was a small metal box wedged into the gap between the wall and an old workbench. It was locked, but the lock was old and cheap. I forced it open with a screwdriver. Inside there were documents. Papers, photographs. I pulled everything out and spread it across the workbench. There were medical records, not my father's, but someone named Thomas Garrett. Birth certificate, social security card. A driver's license photo that looked nothing like my father, but had his height and approximate age. There were travel documents, receipts from motels in different states, a lease agreement for an apartment in Richmond, Virginia dated 1996, signed by Thomas Garrett. And there was a letter, handwritten, addressed to my mother. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I need you to know that everything I did was to protect you and the kids. I can't explain it all now. But if anything happens to me, don't let them tell you it was natural causes. Don't let them close the case, please." It wasn't signed, but I recognized my father's handwriting. I sat down on the concrete floor, the letter in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. My father had a second identity. He'd been living a double life. And he'd known something might happen to him. I took everything upstairs and spread it out on the kitchen table. Then I woke my mother. She came downstairs in her robe, blinking in the light, looking confused and worried. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" I gestured to the table. "I found these in the basement. I need you to tell me what's going on." She looked at the documents. Her face went pale. She sat down slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Where did you find these? She asked quietly. Behind the paint cans. In a metal box. She closed her eyes. For a long time she didn't say anything. Then, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, she said, I didn't know he kept them. Kept what? What is this, Mom? She opened her eyes and looked at me. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, tired in a way that went beyond years. Your father worked for the government, she said, not just as an engineer. He did other things he couldn't talk about. He told me a little after you were born. He said he was trying to get out, but it wasn't easy. They didn't like people leaving. Who's they? I don't know. He never said. He just told me that if anything happened to him, I needed to say it was natural causes. No questions, no autopsy. He said it would be safer that way. For all of us, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So when he died, I did what he asked, she said. The medical examiner said it looked like a heart attack. I told them we didn't want an autopsy. I signed the papers. We buried him. But you didn't believe it. She shook her head. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it really was just a heart attack. He was under a lot of stress. He wasn't sleeping well. And after a while, it was easier to just accept it. I looked down at the documents again. What about Thomas Garrett? I don't know. He never told me about that. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of the voice. She listened, her face unreadable. When it finished, she looked at me. That's him, she whispered. I contacted the county medical examiner's office the next morning and told them I wanted my father's case reopened. They asked why. I told them I'd found evidence suggesting his death might not have been natural. They said they'd look into it. 2 days later, an investigator named Linda Chen called me. She said she'd reviewed the file and agreed there were some irregularities. The original report had been signed off unusually quickly. No toxicology screen had been performed. The attending physician who'd pronounced him dead had retired years ago and moved out of state. Would you be willing to consent to an exhumation? She asked. I said yes. It took 3 weeks to get the necessary approvals. During that time I hired a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Song who specialized in wrongful death cases. She reviewed everything I'd found and agreed to take the case on contingency. If your father was involved in something classified, this could get complicated, she warned me. There are legal protections in place for certain government activities. We might hit walls we can't get through. I just want to know the truth, I said. Then we'll do our best to find it. The exhumation took place on a cold morning in early November. I wasn't allowed to be present, but Linda Chen called me later that afternoon. We found something, she said. Your father's body shows signs of poisoning, specifically a compound that mimics the symptoms of cardiac arrest. It's not something that would show up in a standard autopsy, especially if no one was looking for it. But with modern testing, it's detectable. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. So he was murdered. It's looking that way. We've opened a formal investigation. I'll need you to come in and give a full statement, and we'll need access to everything you found in that basement. I gave her everything. Over the next several months, the investigation expanded. Linda Chen brought in federal investigators. They traced the Richmond apartment lease back to a shell company that had connections to a now defunct private contractor that had worked with the Department of Defense in the 90s. They found records of my father's involvement in intelligence work, low level, mostly logistical support, but enough to make him a liability when certain operations went sideways. They found evidence that he'd tried to resign in 1996. His request had been denied. And they found records indicating that 3 other men who'd worked with him had also died under suspicious circumstances between 1995 and 1999. Patricia filed a wrongful death suit against the contractor's successor company and several individuals who'd been named in the federal investigation. Most of the charges were dropped due to statute of limitations issues or lack of direct evidence. But 2 of the individuals, both former mid-level operatives, were indicted on conspiracy charges. The case made headlines briefly. Then it faded. That's how these things go. The phone calls stopped after the exhumation. I never found out who'd been making them. Linda Chen had her theories. Maybe someone with a conscience. Someone who'd known what happened and wanted it to come to light. Maybe another operative who'd been involved and was now dying themselves, looking to unburden their guilt. I'd probably never know for sure, but I did get one more piece of closure. 8 months into the investigation, Linda Chen called and told me they'd identified one of the men in the photo I'd found. His name was Carl Brennan. He'd worked with my father in the mid-90s and had been living under an assumed identity in a veterans care facility in rural Virginia for the past 12 years. He had advanced dementia. Most days he didn't know where he was. But he'd been placed there and paid for by a legal trust that traced back to the same network my father had been part of. He's in no condition to be interviewed, Linda said. But I thought you'd want to know. He's one of the few who made it out. I asked her for the facility's address. She hesitated, then gave it to me. I drove down on a Saturday. The facility was small, quiet, tucked into the hills surrounded by farmland. I told them I was a family friend. They let me see him. Carl Brennan was sitting in a wheelchair by a window, staring out at nothing. He was thin, frail, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't look at me when I sat down. "Mr. Brennan," I said quietly. "My name is Marcus. My father was." "Thomas?" he said suddenly, his voice clear for just a moment. He turned his head and looked at me with sharp, focused eyes. "You look like him." I froze. "You knew him. We all knew him. Good man. Too good." "They didn't like that. Did you call me?" I asked. "A few months ago." He stared at me, confused now. The clarity was fading. "I don't remember. A nurse came by and told me visiting time was almost over. I thanked Carl, even though I wasn't sure he understood, and I left. I never went back. My father was reburied in a different cemetery, one with more trees and a view of the hills. Vanessa and I were there. My mother. A few of his old colleagues who'd stayed in touch over the years. Linda Chen came too. She stood at a respectful distance, hands folded, watching quietly as the casket was lowered. Afterward, she came over and shook my hand. "I'm sorry we couldn't get more for you," she said. "You got enough," I told her. And I meant it. The lawsuit eventually settled out of court. The terms were confidential, but it was enough to make sure my mother was taken care of for the rest of her life. Vanessa and I each received a payment as well. We donated most of it to organizations that helped veterans and whistleblowers. I didn't want the money. I just wanted the record to show what had happened. And now it does. Sometimes I think about that phone call, about the voice that whispered my name in the dark. I don't know if it was really my father. Maybe it was Carl in one of his lucid moments, trying to make things right. Maybe it was someone else entirely, someone who'd known my father and wanted his story to be told. Or maybe, in some way I can't explain and don't entirely believe, it really was him, reaching out across 27 years, across whatever distance separates the living from the dead, to make sure the truth finally came to light. I don't talk about it much. Vanessa and I have an unspoken agreement not to dig into the details. My mother never asked to see the final investigative reports. She said she didn't need to. She'd known in her own way all along. I visit his grave a few times a year now. I bring flowers. I stand there and talk to him the way I wish I had when he was alive. I tell him about my work, about the life I'm building, about the things I'm learning. And sometimes, when the wind shifts or a bird calls from the trees, I feel like he's listening. If you've ever carried a truth no one else believed, if you've ever waited years just to be heard, you're not alone.